What happens when Hollywood's most beloved and humble star finally reaches his breaking point on live television? What we witnessed on The View was nothing short of explosive, and it all started when Joy Behar decided to cross a line that should never have been crossed. This confrontation has everyone talking, and by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why Keanu Reeves, the man who never loses his cool, absolutely lost it on national TV. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is about to get intense. The day started like any other episode of The View. The familiar theme music played, the audience applauded, and the co-hosts took their seats around that iconic table. Joy Behar, as usual, was ready with her sharp tongue and controversial takes. But what she didn't expect was that her guest, Keanu Reeves, would be the one person who wouldn't just sit there and take it. Keanu walked onto the set with his trademark calm demeanor, wearing a simple black suit and that gentle smile that has charmed millions worldwide. The audience erupted in applause as he made his way to the guest chair, waving modestly and taking his seat with the grace of someone who's done 1,000 interviews before. "Welcome to The View, Keanu," Whoopi Goldberg said warmly as the applause died down. "It's great to have you here. Thank you for having me." Keanu replied, his voice soft and genuine. "It's a pleasure to be here with all of you." The interview began smoothly enough. They talked about his latest film project, his motorcycle passion, and his well-known acts of kindness that have become internet legends. Keanu answered each question with thoughtfulness and humility, never trying to steal the spotlight or promote himself too aggressively. But Joy Behar had been unusually quiet during these opening minutes, and anyone who knew her knew that silence from Joy meant she was loading up for something big. She sat there with that familiar smirk, tapping her pen against her notes, waiting for her moment to pounce. "You know, Keanu," Joy suddenly interjected, cutting off a story he was telling about working with young actors. "I have to ask you something that's been bothering me." The energy in the room shifted instantly. The other co-hosts exchanged glances and Keanu turned his full attention to Joy, his expression still pleasant but now more focused. "Of course," he said simply. "What would you like to know?" Joy leaned forward, that predatory smile spreading across her face. "Well, you've built this whole image around being this nice guy, this humble actor who gives away millions and helps strangers on the street, but I have to wonder, is any of it real? Or is it all just the most elaborate public relations campaign in Hollywood history?" The studio fell silent. Even the audience seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the kind of question guests usually faced on The View, especially not someone as universally beloved as Keanu Reeves. Keanu's expression didn't change dramatically, but those who knew how to read him could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible shift in his posture. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" Joy wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed energized by the tension she'd created. "Oh, come on, Keanu. You're telling me that a Hollywood actor, someone who's made hundreds of millions of dollars, is genuinely this selfless person? That there's no calculation behind all these good deeds? That your whole modest, humble thing isn't just another performance?" The other host looked uncomfortable now. Whoopi cleared her throat, clearly wanting to steer the conversation elsewhere. But Joy was just getting started. Joy continued, her voice getting sharper. "Normal people don't have photographers following them around when they do good deeds. Normal people don't have their acts of kindness become viral marketing campaigns for their movies. So, forgive me if I'm a little skeptical of St. Keanu." Keanu sat still for a moment, processing what he just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was still controlled, but there was something different about it now, something harder. "Joy, I understand that skepticism is part of your job, but I think you're crossing into territory that's not just unfair, it's cruel." "Cruel?" Joy laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh please, I'm asking legitimate questions that journalists should be asking. You want cruel? Cruel is manipulating people's emotions for profit. Cruel is building a fake persona to sell movie tickets." That's when something shifted in Keanu's eyes. The man who had remained calm through decades of personal tragedy, who had faced unimaginable loss with grace and dignity, was finally reaching his limit. "You want to talk about manipulation, Joy?" Keanu's voice was still quiet, but now it carried a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "Let's talk about manipulation." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Keanu Reeves, the man who had spent his entire career avoiding confrontation, was now staring directly at Joy Behar with an intensity that made the entire studio hold its breath. "You sit at this table every day," Keanu continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "And you tear people down for entertainment. You take someone's genuine attempt to do good in the world, and you twist it into something cynical and calculated because that's what gets ratings, isn't it, Joy?" Joy's smirk faltered slightly, but she wasn't backing down. "I'm a journalist, Keanu. I ask hard questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "Hard questions?" Keanu leaned forward now, his calm exterior finally cracking. "You want to ask hard questions? Then ask me about the work. Ask me about the craft. Ask me about the stories we're trying to tell. But don't you dare sit there and question whether my grief is real, whether my desire to help people is genuine, whether the loss of my best friend, my daughter, my sister somehow made me into a better person or just a better actor." The mention of his personal losses sent a visible shock through the panel. Even Joy seemed momentarily taken aback, but she recovered quickly, her defensive instincts kicking in. Now you're being dramatic. Joy shot back. I never mentioned your personal tragedies. I'm talking about your public image, your brand. There's a difference. No, Joy, there isn't. Keanu's voice was rising now, something none of them had ever heard before. You can't separate the two when you're attacking someone's character. When you call someone's kindness fake, when you suggest their generosity is calculated, you're attacking everything they are. You're telling the world that goodness doesn't exist, that every decent act must have an ulterior motive. Tsunami host tried to jump in. Maybe we should. No, Keanu said firmly, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. Let her finish. She clearly has more to say about my supposed manipulation. Please, Joy, enlighten us all about how helping a stranded motorist change a tire is a publicity stunt. Tell us how giving my Matrix salary to the crew was just good business. Explain to everyone how privately paying for cancer treatments for friends is somehow calculated marketing. Joy's face was weening now, her voice getting shriller. You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You've got a list ready. You know exactly which good deeds to mention when someone challenges you. That's not genuine kindness. That's crisis management. The audience began to murmur, some clearly uncomfortable with Joy's continued attacks. But Keanu wasn't done. You want to know what crisis management looks like, Joy? Keanu stood up from his chair, something that caught everyone off guard. Crisis management is when someone like you gets called out for being unnecessarily cruel on national television. And instead of apologizing, instead of showing an ounce of human decency, you double down and attack harder. That's crisis management. I am not being cruel, Joy insisted, but her voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. I'm being realistic. I'm being honest. Honest? Keanu's laugh was sharp and bitter, a sound none of them had ever heard from him before. You want honest? Here's honest. You're not a journalist, Joy. Journalists seek truth. You seek controversy. You don't care about facts. You care about reactions. You don't want to inform people. You want to upset them because upset people keep watching and watching people make you money. Whoopi tried again to intervene. Keanu, maybe we can. No, Whoopi. With all due respect, I'm not finished. Keanu turned back to Joy, who was now shifting uncomfortably in her seat. You want to question my motives? Fine. Let's question yours. How much of your salary comes from creating drama? How much of your career is built on tearing down people who can't fight back? And when someone finally does fight back, when someone finally calls you out for what you really are, you hide behind the label of journalist like it gives you permission to be heartless. Joy's face was now completely red, and she was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles were white. How dare you lecture me about journalism? You're an actor. You pretend to be other people for a living, and you pretend to be a decent human being for a living. Keanu shot back without hesitation. At least I'm honest about what I do being pretend. The studio was dead silent now. The cameras were still rolling, but everyone seemed frozen by the intensity of what they were witnessing. This wasn't the Keanu Reeves the world knew. This was someone who had finally been pushed too far. Joy tried to regain control of the situation. You know what, Keanu? You're proving my point perfectly. The mask is coming off now, isn't it? The real you is coming out, and it's not nearly as nice as you pretend to be. That's when Keanu's voice dropped to almost a whisper. But somehow it carried more power than if he had been shouting. The real me, Joy, is someone who has buried more people than anyone should have to bury. The real me is someone who wakes up every day and chooses to try to make the world a little bit better instead of a little bit worse. The real me is someone who believes that kindness matters, that helping people matters, that treating others with dignity and respect matters. And the real you is someone who just spent 10 minutes on national television trying to convince people that none of those things are real. The words hit Joy like a physical blow. For the first time in the entire confrontation, she seemed genuinely speechless. The woman who always had a comeback, who never backed down from any fight, was sitting there with her mouth slightly open, staring at a man who had just stripped away every defense she had. But Keanu wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and decades of restraint, of biting his tongue, of taking the high road while others took shots at him, came pouring out. You know what the really tragic part is, Joy? Keanu continued, his voice still quiet, but carrying an edge that cut through the silence like a blade. You could use your platform for something meaningful. You could lift people up. You could ask questions that actually matter, that help people understand the world better. But instead, you choose to be a bully, and not just any bully, a bully with a microphone and an audience of millions. Joy finally found her voice, but it was shakier than before. I am not a bully. I ask tough questions. If you can't handle the heat, stop. Keanu's single word was delivered with such quiet authority that Joy actually stopped mid-sentence. Just stop. You've said enough. Actually, you said enough about 5 minutes ago, but you kept going because that's what you do. You don't know when to stop. You don't know when you've crossed the line from journalism into cruelty, from skepticism into character assassination. Sonani host tried once more to defuse the situation. Maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Keanu said firmly, still looking directly at Joy. We're gonna finish this conversation right here, right now, because the people watching deserve to see how this ends. They deserve to see what happens when someone finally calls out the playground bully. Joy's defensive anger was back now, her voice rising. Playground bully, are you kidding me? I'm doing my job. I'm holding celebrities accountable. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked. Whose questions, Joy? Keanu's voice was getting stronger, more passionate. Who exactly is demanding that you question whether kindness is real? Who is asking you to tear down people who try to do good in the world? Because I'll tell you who's not asking for that. The people who benefit from that kindness. The crew members who got to send their kids to college because I shared my salary with them. The cancer patients who got treatment because someone cared enough to help. The stranded families who got home safely because someone stopped to help. None of them are asking you to question whether that help was genuine. But the public has a right to know. Joy started, but Keanu cut her off again. The public has a right to know the truth, not your cynical interpretation of the truth. The public has a right to accurate information, not your bitter commentary masquerading as journalism. And the public has a right to see good things happening in the world without having someone immediately tell them it's all fake. The other co-hosts were exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable with how far this had gone, but also seemingly unable to stop what was happening. This was television history in the making, and they all knew it. Joy made one more attempt to regain the upper hand. You know what I think, Keanu? I think you're having this big emotional outburst because you know I'm right. I think you're angry because someone finally saw through your act and you can't handle being exposed. That was the moment. That was when Keanu Reeves, the man who had remained calm through decades of loss and pain, finally exploded. Exposed, his voice boomed through the studio loud enough to make several people jump. You want to talk about being exposed? Let's talk about what you've exposed here today, Joy. You've exposed yourself as someone who is so miserable, so bitter, so incapable of believing that good exists in the world that you have to tear down anyone who proves you wrong. Joy tried to interrupt, but Keanu wasn't having it. No, you've had your turn to talk. You've had your turn to attack, to question, to tear down. Now it's my turn. His voice was still loud but controlled like a controlled explosion. You've exposed yourself as someone who thinks cynicism is intelligence, that cruelty is courage, that tearing people down is the same as building yourself up. You've shown everyone watching that you would rather destroy something beautiful than admit that beauty can exist. The studio was electric now. The audience was completely silent, but you could feel their energy, their shock at what they were witnessing. This was not the Keanu Reeves they knew, but somehow it was exactly the Keanu Reeves they needed to see. And you know what else you've exposed, Joy? Keanu continued, his voice dropping back to that dangerously quiet level. You've exposed the fact that you're exactly the kind of person who makes good people want to stop being good. You're the voice in people's heads that says, "Don't help that stranger." People will think you're showing off. You're the reason people don't want to be generous because they know someone like you will question their motives. Joy was visibly shaken now, but she made one final desperate attempt to turn the tables. This is rich coming from someone who's having a complete meltdown on live television. Is this the real Keanu Reeves? Is this the calm, centered person you want people to think you are? Keanu stood up fully now, his full height towering over the seated panel. When he spoke, his voice was steady again, but it carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire studio. You're absolutely right, Joy. This is the real me. This is someone who has spent his entire life trying to be kind, trying to help others, trying to make the world a little bit better, and who finally reached his limit when faced with someone determined to convince the world that kindness is a lie. This is someone who has lost everyone he's ever loved and still chooses to love. This is someone who has been knocked down by life more times than anyone should be and still gets up every day trying to lift others up. And yes, this is someone who finally got angry when faced with a person whose job seems to be making sure no one else gets lifted up. He paused, looking around at the other hosts, then back at Joy, who was now noticeably smaller in her chair. You wanted the real me, Joy. Here I am. I'm someone who believes that the world has enough people tearing each other down and it needs more people building each other up. I'm someone who thinks that when you have a platform, when you have an audience, when you have influence, you have a responsibility to use it for good. And I'm someone who thinks that what you've done here today, what you do on this show regularly, is the opposite of good. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Joy opened her mouth several times as if to speak, but nothing came out. The other host sat frozen, unsure how to proceed. The audience remained completely still. Finally, Keanu picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. I think I'm done here, he said quietly. Thank you for having me on the show. I hope the people watching got something valuable out of this conversation, even if it wasn't what anyone expected. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back to Joy one final time. Enjoy. I genuinely hope that someday you find whatever it is you're looking for by tearing other people down, because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like it's making you very happy. As Keanu walked off the set, the studio remained in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Joy Behar sitting at the table, speechless, while the man she had tried to expose had instead exposed something much more uncomfortable, the reality of her own approach to the world. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was Joy Behar out of line, or was she just doing her job? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. What other celebrity confrontation would you like to see us cover?